Today we'll be looking at how we can apply custom code to Squarespace 7.1 only on edit mode or only on the live site. I'm going to be showing you 3 examples of how you can use this trick, but keep in mind that this is something that you can implement on pretty much any modification that you're working on. Now, the key to this adaptation has to do with 2 very specific classes that Squarespace applies to the body tag of their pages while we're editing the site in the backend. So depending on how we use them in our code, we can pretty much turn our code or parts of it on or off based on what we need. Before we jump into the actual examples, I want to show you where those classes are and what they are called so that you can have them as a reference for your own modifications. So here I have my test site, and if I inspect the body tag while I'm inside the backend, scrolling all the way up to the body tag, we're going to see that there are a lot of classes applied to this, and this is pretty much the same thing for every single page in Squarespace. However, if we go all the way down, we can notice that there's a specific class called sqs-edit-mode inside this list. Now, let's take a look at what happens when we actually enter the edit mode of the site. If we go into the inspect element tool and once again search for that body tag, where we previously saw that sqs-edit-mode class, that one is still applying in this situation. However, there's a second class present here that's called sqs-edit-mode-active. Now, if we happen to inspect the same backend of Squarespace, while we have this completely stretched out in the backend, once more going inside the inspect element tool and going all the way up to the body tag, we can see that here near the end, none of those classes show up. And then if we go onto the actual live site without being logged in into Squarespace, if we go all the way up to that body tag, we're going to see that those 2 classes don't show up in here either. So basically, those 2 classes of sqs-edit-mode and sqs-edit-mode-active are the ones that we can rely on to be able to decide whether the code applies in one situation or the other. With this in mind, let's go ahead and hop on to the first example. So here, I already have an auto layout section that has a little bit of styling applied to it. You can see that the titles show up from the get-go, but to be able to see the paragraph or the description text, I have to hover over each of the cards. Now, if I'm developing this section myself, or if my client has to make some changes to the content, I want to make sure that this code doesn't apply while I'm working on the site. So instead of having to go back and forth into the custom CSS window to disable the code or even tell my client to do that, I'm going to modify the selector so that the code doesn't apply automatically at this point. So knowing that the class of sqs-edit-mode-active shows up only in this situation, what I can do is tell the browser to not apply the code if that class is present. Let me show you what that looks like inside the code. We're basically going to be relying on something called the not pseudo class, which I sometimes refer to as the not selector or the exclusion selector. You can see this not pseudo class as pretty much a filter. It helps target things on our sites when things don't have a specific class or ID or other attribute applied to them. It can be used in many different situations, but right now we're going to use it to differentiate between the active edit mode and every other situation. So this code that I have in here is what's currently applying the hover mode to my auto layout cards. Now, based on what we saw previously, this selector, sqs-edit-mode-active, would target the body tag when the sqs-edit-mode-active is present. So whatever we add in here is going to apply only in that specific situation. However, what we're trying to do is the complete opposite. We want the code to apply when this class is not present. So in order to filter out this class or exclude this class, we're going to add in here the not selector. So now this is going to read as when the body does not have the class of sqs-edit-mode-active, any code that we have between these brackets is going to apply. And in our case, or at least in this specific example, that is going to be this whole chunk of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the entire code, these two snippets, in between those brackets. So now anything that is sitting within these brackets is only going to apply when the body does not have the class of sqs-edit-mode-active, which means that I'm outside of the active edit mode. So let's see what that looks like here on the live side. So if I refresh my live side here, you can see that the customization is still applying. I still have the hover mode where the paragraph or description text only shows up if I hover over each card. Then here inside the regular backend, let's call it, here you can see that the customization keeps applying. If I stretch this out, the customization continues to apply because that class is not present. Therefore, the code is allowed to work. But then if I click on the edit button, you can see how the code stops working because that class of sqs-edit-mode-active got added to the body tag and therefore disabled our code automatically. Hey there, so as I'm editing this video right now, I'm deciding that I'm going to be splitting this into 3 parts so that we can have one example per part, just to keep things as concise as possible. So in this first part, we address how we can stop the code from working while we're actively modifying content on the page so that it doesn't bother us while we're trying to do stuff and move stuff around. In part 2, we're going to look at the second example where we're going to stop the code from applying altogether throughout the backend. So basically, if you have the side panel open or if you're editing the content, the code is not going to apply. And then in part 3, we're going to see the third example where we're going to do the complete opposite. We're going to force the code to work only while we're in the backend of Squarespace. So this trick is pretty helpful for very specific situations, especially if you're working with something like code blocks that have tab sections in them or a widget that doesn't have a script. In the meantime, if you found this helpful, please let me know by giving this video a big thumbs up or leaving a comment down below. I would love to know if this is helpful for you. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in part 2.